Some places refuse to let go of the dead. Old buildings, abandoned hospitals, houses where something terrible once happened. Most people drive past them without a second thought. But the people who stopped, the ones who went inside, they came back, changed. Tonight, I have 5 real locations, 5 places with documented histories of something that science cannot fully explain. These aren't campfire legends. These are places you can visit right now, if you're brave enough. Let's begin. The house that drove a family out in 28 days. The Amityville Horror House, Amityville, New York. Before we talk about the haunting, we need to talk about the murder, because that's where the story really starts. On November 13, 1974, at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York, a 23-year-old man named Ronald DeFeo Jr. walked through his own house in the middle of the night and shot every single member of his family while they slept. His mother, his father, his 2 brothers, his 2 sisters, all 6 of them, killed in their beds. None of them woke up. None of them struggled. None of them even seemed to have heard the gunshots that killed the person sleeping in the next room. Investigators were disturbed by this detail. How does an entire family sleep through gunshots? Why didn't anyone run? Ronald DeFeo Jr. was convicted of murder. His only defense? He claimed voices in the house had told him to do it. 1 year later, in December 1975, a couple named George and Kathy Lutz purchased the house, fully aware of its history, hoping they could move past it. They got a house at a discount. It was a good deal. They were optimistic. They lasted exactly 28 days. What happened inside that house during those 28 days has become one of the most documented and debated paranormal cases in American history. George began waking up every night at 3:15 a.m., the exact time investigators later determined that the DeFeo murders had occurred. He would get up, go to the garage, and sit there for hours, staring into nothing, without knowing why. Kathy began having vivid nightmares about the murders. Nightmares so accurate in their details that she described scenes she had never been told about. Green slime oozed from the walls. A crucifix they had hung in the house had turned upside down on its own. Their daughter began talking to an imaginary friend she called Jody, a pig with glowing red eyes that she claimed stood outside her second-floor window. A priest who came to bless the house heard a deep male voice say, "Get out," in an empty room and fled immediately. He later developed mysterious blisters on his hands that no doctor could explain. On the 28th day, the Lutz family packed what they could carry and left in the middle of the night. They never returned. They left behind all their furniture, their belongings, everything. They simply ran. The house still stands at 112 Ocean Avenue. People still live there. The current owners don't talk about what they experience inside. But the question that still hasn't been answered, the one that started all of this, remains. How did 6 people sleep through their own murders? The plantation where the dead never left. The Myrtles Plantation, St. Francisville, Louisiana. Most haunted places have one ghost story. The Myrtles Plantation has at least 12. Built in 1796 on land that was already a Tunica burial ground, the Myrtles Plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana, has accumulated centuries of tragedy within its walls. 10 of the people who live there are believed to have died inside the house itself, and many of them, according to dozens of documented accounts, never really left. The most famous ghost is Chloe. Chloe was an enslaved woman who worked in the plantation house in the early 1800s. According to historical accounts, she was caught eavesdropping on her enslavers' private conversations and, as punishment, had her ear cut off. She wore a green turban to cover the wound for the rest of her life. Later, the story goes, Chloe baked a birthday cake for the plantation owner's family, a cake laced with a small amount of poisonous oleander, intending only to make them slightly ill so she could nurse them back to health and prove her worth. Instead, the plantation owner's wife and 2 young daughters died. Chloe was hanged. Today, guests at the Myrtles, which operates as a bed and breakfast, regularly report seeing a figure in a green turban moving through the hallways at night. She appears in photographs taken by guests who didn't notice her standing nearby. She's been captured on security cameras in the main corridor, walking slowly toward the staircase and then simply disappearing. But Chloe is not the only presence at the Myrtles. There is the gentleman, a ghost seen walking the grounds at dusk, always in 19th century clothing, always heading somewhere with purpose, always vanishing before he arrives. There are children heard laughing and running on the upper floors when no children are staying in the house. Housekeeping staff have reported finding toys moved, small handprints on freshly cleaned mirrors, beds disturbed in rooms that hadn't been slept in. And then there is the piano. In the front parlor sits an original 19th century piano. Staff members and guests have repeatedly reported hearing it play a single, slow melody in the dead of the night when the parlor is locked and empty. The melody always stops the moment someone opens the door. One investigator who spent the night at the Myrtles in 2019 described waking up to find a woman standing at the foot of his bed, wearing a green cloth over her head, watching him silently. He turned on the light. She was gone. He checked out at 4 a.m. and drove through the night to get home. The Myrtles Plantation continues to welcome overnight guests. Very few of them sleep well. The prison where evil left stains on the walls. Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. When Eastern State Penitentiary opened in 1829, it was considered the most modern prison in the world. It was also, by almost any measure, one of the most psychologically brutal. The prison operated on a philosophy of complete solitary confinement. Every inmate, from the petty thief to the violent killer, was kept alone in their cell for the entirety of their sentence. No conversation, no human contact. They ate alone. They exercised alone. When they were moved through the prison, guards placed a hood over their heads so they could not see or be seen by other inmates. The architects believed that total isolation would force criminals to reflect on their crimes and find God. What it actually did was drive most of them insane. Prisoners who broke under the isolation were subjected to punishments that went far beyond the official rules. Some were chained to walls in outdoor yards during Pennsylvania winters. Some were strapped into a chair so tightly that circulation was cut off for hours. Some were placed in a pit dug beneath the prison floor, a dark underground hole with no light and no sound, sometimes for weeks at a time, a place they simply called the hole. By the time Eastern State Penitentiary closed in 1971, over 75,000 inmates had passed through its walls. Whatever was left behind when they were gone, the suffering, the madness, the decades of human anguish soaked into the stone, has never fully dissipated. Guards who worked the closing shift in the final years before the prison closed reported hearing sounds from empty cell blocks, not sounds of settling stone or ventilation. Voices. Whispering, sometimes crying, sometimes something they could only describe as cackling laughter echoing from corridors where no one was standing. Since the prison became a museum and historic site, the reports have only multiplied. Tour guides have refused to enter certain cell blocks alone. Visitors have photographed figures standing in doorways, figures not present to the naked eye, but clearly visible in the developed image. Shadow shapes have been captured on camera in the cell blocks, moving against the light. One of the most disturbing recurring reports comes from cell block 12. Multiple visitors on separate occasions with no contact with each other have described the same experience. Turning a corner in cell block 12 and seeing a face pressed against the bars of one of the cells. A face that watches them and then withdraws back into the darkness. Every person who reported this experience described the face the same way. The expression wasn't angry. It wasn't frightening in a way a monster is frightening. It just looked desperately, unbearably lonely. The witch that killed a man and visited a president. The Bell Witch Haunting, Adams, Tennessee. This next case is unusual for one reason above all others. It is one of the only paranormal cases in American history where a president of the United States is on record as a witness. In 1817, a farmer named John Bell began experiencing strange things on his property in Adams, Tennessee. It started small, knocking sounds on the walls of the house at night, then chains being dragged across the floor. Then, eventually, a voice. The voice started as a whisper. Over time, it grew louder, more distinct, more articulate. It could hold conversations. It knew things it had no way of knowing, private conversations that had happened in other locations, secrets that family members had never shared with anyone. It recited scripture, it sang hymns, and it had a particular, focused, relentless hatred for John Bell himself. The entity, which became known as the Bell Witch, tormented John Bell personally. It slapped him. It pulled his hair in the night. It made a sound like someone smacking their lips that John Bell said followed him everywhere, indoors and outdoors, for years. Neighbors who came to witness the haunting heard the voice, felt the physical presence, experienced the slaps and pinches themselves. This was not one family's private delusion. Dozens of people in the community documented their own encounters. In 1819, Andrew Jackson, then a general and future president of the United States, visited the Bell Farm with a group of men, reportedly curious about the stories he had heard. What happened on that visit reportedly shook his entire group. One member of Jackson's party, a self-described witch tamer, who had boasted he had a technique to deal with spirits, was reportedly thrown across the room and chased off the property by an invisible force, while the voice laughed. Jackson's group spent a sleepless, terrifying night at the Bell Farm. Jackson is recorded as saying he would rather face the entire British Army than spend another night in that house. In 1820, John Bell died. His family found a vial of strange liquid near his body, a liquid no one could identify. His son gave some of it to the family cat. The cat died almost instantly. The voice, witnesses reported, laughed when John Bell died. After his death, the Bell Witch grew quieter. It told the family it would return, and in 1828, strange events reportedly resumed in the house for a brief period, before fading away entirely. The Bell Farm no longer stands, but the cave on the property, known as Bell Witch Cave, is still there, still open to visitors, and people who go inside still report hearing things they cannot explain. Andrew Jackson reportedly never talked about what he witnessed that night. Some things, apparently, are too strange to put into words. The hotel that inspired The Shining and earns its reputation every night. The Stanley Hotel, Estes Park, Colorado. Stephen King has stayed in a lot of hotels, but he only checked into one that kept him awake all night and inspired the most famous horror novel ever written. The Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado was built in 1909 by Freeland Oscar Stanley, the inventor of the Stanley Streamer automobile. Perched in the Rocky Mountains, grand and remote and beautiful, it was built as a luxury retreat for the wealthy. For most of its history, it operated exactly as intended, a stunning, peaceful mountain escape. Then, the off-season came. Every autumn, as the mountain roads became dangerous and the tourist season ended, the Stanley Hotel emptied out. Skeleton staff, empty hallways, echoing silence through a building designed to hold hundreds of guests. It was in this off-season in 1974 that Stephen King and his wife checked in as the only guests. They were given room 217. King has described what happened that night in interviews. He woke in the early hours of the morning, unable to sleep. He walked through the empty hotel and deserted ballroom, the dark corridors, the grand staircase, and the novel came to him almost fully formed. The isolation, the grandeur, the sense that something ancient and malevolent lived inside a beautiful building. He wrote The Shining. Room 237 in the novel is room 217 at the Stanley. But here's what Stephen King didn't invent. The Stanley Hotel's paranormal history predates his visit by decades. The most active location in the hotel is room 217, the very room King stayed in, where the ghost of a former housekeeper named Elizabeth Wilson has been reported since early 20th century. Guests wake to find their luggage unpacked and neatly arranged. Others report the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of their bed in the darkness. Room 428 is famous for the ghost children. Multiple guests staying separately over many years have reported hearing children laughing and running in the hallway outside room 428 in the middle of the night. When they open the door, the hallway is empty, silent. The hotel's basement, the original boiler and utility area, is considered the most intense location on the property. Staff members have refused to work alone in the basement after hours. Security cameras in the basement have captured shapes and movement that maintenance workers cannot account for. The hotel now embraces its reputation. It offers ghost tours, paranormal investigations, and horror film festivals. Thousands of people visit every year, specifically hoping to experience something unexplained. Most of them do, and some of them, like Stephen King on that quiet autumn night in 1974, walk away with something they didn't expect. Not just a scare, but a story they'll never stop telling. 5 places, 5 histories soaked in tragedy, suffering, and things that cannot be fully explained. Here's what strikes me every time I research cases like these. The haunting almost always starts with something real, something human. A murder, a punishment, a family torn apart, decades of suffering pressed into the walls of a building. Maybe ghosts aren't supernatural at all. Maybe they're just memory, refusing to be forgotten. If you ever find yourself near Amityville or St. Francisville or anywhere mentioned in this video, you'll know where not to stop for the night. Or you can. It's up to you. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.